Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I've been given a pin and a balloon. I don't know about you. The pin, I presume, is to wake myself up before this presentation's over, but I don't know quite what the balloon is for. I presume they might enlighten us later on. Ladislav referred just now to the Wild Europe Initiative, which he in fact chairs very effectively, albeit on a fairly laid-back basis. And what we're trying to do is to produce a coordinated strategy for protection and restoration of wilderness and wildland throughout Europe. It's a grouping, an informal grouping, but we think quite an effective one, of NGOs. Just got to get this going in the right direction. How do we do that? Good. We have a battery that works. We've amply visited this morning the issue of Europe being this wonderful paradox. Those of you who are coming here expecting to find a semi-urban wasteland will have been gloriously disabused by now. It is the most crowded and developed. Only 1 or 2% of wilderness or near wilderness still remaining, and deeply fragmented at that. And you'll see this more and more as the days accumulate in the Congress to come, this incredibly spectacular wild areas, incredibly spectacular panoply of species to go with them. Yes, there are many threats, very serious threats, and pretty much replicating what you will have seen around the world and be dealing with probably on a daily basis. Logging, inappropriately located infrastructural development, agriculture in some areas. Even renewable energy is a problem. But alongside that, there is historic potential, genuinely historic. It was a word used this morning, and it's not an exaggeration. And that's potential not just to protect existing areas, but to look towards enlarging them, linking, creating new ones, to invert the whole scenario of ecological recovery and of wild conservation in Europe, in effect. Let's look at some of the policy drivers behind this. And what we're trying to do in Wild Europe essentially is to help catalyze the right sort of policy background, the instrument provision that helps people working in the field, either in a protective or a restorative capacity. So taking the timeline here, a little bit of dry history if you like, but hugely important stepping stones. 2008, we had this joint petition throughout the conservation sector. Over 140 organizations signed up to it, calling for improved protection for wilderness areas in Europe. And that was probably the first occasion on which the entire conservation sector, traditional as well as, if you like, our subset, had come together with a single unified voice. A little bit later, 2009, at the beginning, you have this European parliamentary resolution, already been referred to. 538 MEPs voted in favour of improved protection, improved funding, improved promotion for wilderness. That is a massive populist mandate, and it's one that we need to use again and again when we come up against challenges or blocks to what we want to achieve. The Prague conference, again that's been referred to, something that Wild Europe helped to develop, produced this action plan for restoration and protection of wilderness and wildland, and we're talking a whole spectrum of continuity here, as was discussed this morning, from marginal agriculture, marginal forestry at one end, up to the deepest we can get to wilderness in Europe at the moment. A year later, 2010, we had the EU Restoration Strategy, another presidential conference, EC Presidency Conference, looking at restoration strategy, bringing in, obviously, representatives from the EC, but also from the CBD, who came over from Montreal, bringing in this international context, which is so crucial to what we're trying to achieve here. The following year, biodiversity for the first time entered into the EU, wilderness entered into the EU Biodiversity Strategy, which is the decennial Bible, renewed every 10 years, and it pretty much sets the priorities for policy, for funding, and general strategic support. So enormously important that we've actually got a step inside it for the first time. And then last year, bringing out these standardized definitions of wilderness and wildland. Again, sounds a bit dry, but absolutely essential to what people are trying to achieve in the field. across a wide spectrum of cultural and geographic circumstances, that is Europe. If you are trying to protect something or restore it, you want to be doing so according to a known formula that you can share across the continent. Out of this background, a number of initiatives are emerging. A lot of them have been mentioned this morning, so I'll skate over them very, very briefly. The EU guidelines on non-intervention management, absolutely critical. They will apply to wilderness and wildland across the Natura 2000 network, and it gives us for the first time a really strong inroad to restoring almost what wilderness to what it really should be, but also looking perhaps at other areas to upgrade them and push them up towards the ultimate, if you like, that we're trying to achieve. Critical issue now is how we promote those guidelines and how they actually operate at strategic level and at field level. EU Wilderness Register, we suggested the first format for that, which was then adopted through the EC and is now being produced. It will come out early next year, I think, as an EC product. It's only applying in EU countries at the moment, obviously non-EU equally important, and that's something that needs addressing. But again, if you know where something is and you know what state it's in, you can then move to make sure that it's properly protected. New areas. You've heard again of one or two of them this morning, this magnificent project in Romania led by Christoph and Barbara Bromberger and their team. And they incidentally have a presentation later on this week, which we strongly recommend that you go along to if you can. It's a big project, 200,000 hectares, of which the central core actually involves buying old-growth forest wilderness. It's expensive, it's not cheap. You're talking a budget for that element alone of probably a couple of €100 million. But critically, it has engaged the support of industrialist philanthropists, not the sort of people you normally would associate with conservation, showing the power, the iconic power of wilderness to engage these new sectoral interests in what we're trying to achieve. France, hugely important. Again, IUCN France, the national committee, is looking to develop a wilderness strategy for the whole country. Very important. Still in the early stages, much to be debated and achieved, but the very fact they're doing that and doing it on an integrated basis is an enormously vital step ahead in our agenda. We talked about area approach so far. It's also a habitat approach. Old-growth forest, amazingly, into the 21st century, the most precious, and in many ways the most vulnerable of all the habitats to do with the wilderness agenda, still does not have an integrated strategy in Europe. We just produced that and we're unveiling it at the moment, immediately after the Congress. All these initiatives using the Wild Europe definition, this new definition, based very heavily around the IUCN one, but if you like, quite fundamentalist in terms of natural process and absence of human trammeling. Initiatives restoration, it's no use just protecting something. You've got to move outside the kraal, if you like, the reactive kraal, become proactive. Use the instruments that were so well examined this morning, where we're talking about marginal agriculture, marginal forestry. The CBD, in its Global Biodiversity Outlook report in 2010, cited 200,000 square kilometres in Europe, of which just under half would be in Western Europe, where marginal agriculture, marginal forestry has capacity to be restored, and then we can use the socio-economic instruments that we've been discussing, and you have an immensely powerful dual approach. So we're not just defending what's there, we're going to expand it, link it, change the agenda. And just taking one of the policy instruments that's now moving into our field of operation as a potential is one of the targets in the EU biodiversity strategy, restoring 15% of degraded ecosystems by 2020. It's ambitious, very ambitious, but it's a target that we have the capacity to help utilize now, and we must very much do so. And that in itself reflects at what can be done at national level. Germany, many of you may know, the federal government has set a target of 2% wilderness area, a magnificent model for other countries to think about. Coming down to local level, Ireland, very recently, Zoltan and I had the privilege of presiding over the opening of a new area, about 10,000 hectares of land, combination of commercial forestry and adjoining bog, and a project that brings together the State Forestry Agency together with an adjoining national park. Commercial forestry, no longer economically viable. They're going to spend 15 years restoring the area, then it's closed off, non-intervention thereafter, and it becomes promoted as a wilderness. Of course, in ecological terms, it's not a wilderness, but the very fact you have a state agency changing its remit from economic towards wilderness is again an enormously important model for general application. Putting all those aspects together, on the protectionist side, on the restoration side, now that we're getting the building blocks properly into place, we need to move up a gear and look at targeting on a more strategic basis. We've not agreed a 5%. It's a figure that we floated in the European Parliament at a forum at the beginning of last year, but we need to start looking at targets and at years and planning ahead as to how we're going to reach them. It's a great way of unifying all the various efforts that are going on at the moment. One critical aspect, and it was well covered by Franz's talk at the end, we must engage outside our sector if we're going to achieve these kind of objectives. So often here we preach to the converted. We need to be talking to the foresters, the landowners, the farmers. Within the EC, excellent what the actual DG Environment has achieved, absolutely magnificent. Let nobody say they are a bureaucracy. They have achieved an enormous amount on the basis of a very, very small resource. But we need to be talking to clima, agriculture, research, transport, energy, etc. Essential for joined-up thinking. But if we can achieve that, there is really, on a historic basis, an enormous amount that we can get done. And I think that very much leads to what, for me, is the central message of this whole Congress. You coming here from all the various parts of the world can help us enormously. You can inspire us. You can give us the benefit of your advice and your experience. But perhaps what we can best give back to you is a message. And it's really quite a simple message, that if we in Europe can restore, can protect our habitats, and do so moreover for social and economic benefit reasons, as well as those relating to the environment and intrinsic wilderness, then that sends a very, very strong message to parts of the world where ecological systems still exist in a much more pristine state over a much greater area. Thank you very much.